Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight to the first event in our Cultural Policy Futures series, supported by the Dunstan Foundation, where I'm from. I'm David Washington, the Executive Director of the Foundation, and also the Adelaide University, the College of Creative Arts, Design and Humanities. And I'm thrilled that the Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Craig Batty, is with us tonight. I won't go through all of the dignitaries because you're all special, but I also will mention Stephen Cheng, Don's partner, is here tonight. Welcome, Stephen. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Kaurna people who've cared for this country for countless thousands of years and whose spiritual relationship with this land continues today. As part of that, I'd also like to mention that it is National Sorry Day today. It's the 29th anniversary of the Bringing Them Home report, which told the stories of hundreds of Aboriginal people who were taken from their families over many, many years, a practice that officially started in South Australia in 1840 and continued for well over a century. And it is Reconciliation Week starting tomorrow, when the Foundation next Wednesday on June 3, Mabo Day actually, will be holding our annual Lowitt O'Donoghue oration. If you haven't caught up with that, Larissa Barrett will be our orator this year, and she's going to be talking about the leadership of Aboriginal women, particularly Lowitt herself, and what modern political leaders can learn from them. There are still some tickets available, so Google it, you'll find it. Thank you. So yes, Cultural Policy Futures is an idea that we were really pleased to support at the Dunstan Foundation. We exist to continue Don's legacy in many areas of policy and public life, including arts and culture. Don, of course, had a deep and complex understanding of arts, its importance to human beings, and the way we relate to each other in communities. He had a lot of esteem for artists and believed our physical environment should be influenced by our cultural environment, that our city should reflect the beauty and creativity of a society which doesn't put culture away in a separate compartment to the rest of public life. He believed our state and its people would be richer if the arts were cultivated, appreciated, and honoured, not by just an elitist few, but by the many. And as he said, to quote him, not as a spare time luxury, but as a full-time part of the fabric of living. And he lived these beliefs in a way that few political leaders have. That's why we are so pleased as a foundation to be joining with the Creative People, Product and Places Research Centre at Adelaide University to present Cultural Policy Futures, New Ideas for Volatile Times. There'll be a series of 4 public events. This is the first. And we're hoping some associated policy-making processes along with that. Because we hope that this series will bridge the gap between the visionary thinking that we need today and practical policy solutions. The next session is coming up in July. I'll tell you some more about that later on. But also a highlight in September this year, we will be celebrating the centenary of Don's birth. And this series will be holding a session saying, what would Don do to reimagine his progressive legacy in the arts for today? So tonight's event, we're going to hear from 2 insightful speakers, Anna Goldsworthy first, and then Tim Strom, both on the topic of AI, creativity, culture, and humans. Then there will be a panel discussion, and there will be a chance then for some questions from the audience, both online. This is being recorded tonight, and of course, you who are in the room tonight. And afterwards, Anna's quarterly essay will be on sale in the foyer. And when you buy a copy, not only can you get Anna's signature on it, but you also be supporting Imprints Bookshop, independent bookseller just down the road and one of Adelaide's institutions. So our first speaker tonight is Anna Goldsworthy. Anna is the author of several books, including the novel Melting Moments and the memoirs Piano Lessons and Welcome to Your New Life. And also, this is not her first rodeo with the quarterly essay. In 2013, she wrote Unfinished Business, Sex, Freedom and Misogyny, published in the wake of Julia Gillard's misogyny speech. Anna is a concert pianist, chamber musician. She's Dean of the Elder Conservatorium of Music and School of Performing Arts at Adelaide University and incoming Artistic Director of the Australian National Academy of Music. Tonight, she will be speaking about her quarterly essay titled The God We Made, The Threat and Promise of Artificial Intelligence. I can't imagine a more apt first topic in this series. Don probably didn't imagine the possibility of cultural items being produced a step removed from humanity, but our generation must. Please welcome Anna Goldsworthy.
Thank you, David, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Is my microphone on? Can you hear me okay at the back? Awesome. I thought I'd just maybe start, I think I might just speak a little bit about the essay and also include a few readings. So I thought I might start with where it all begins, which is my page of introduction. It's called Genesis. It seems we always knew it was going to happen. We have told ourselves stories about it from the beginning. Prometheus stole fire. Pandora opened the box. Icarus flew too close to the sun. Resistance feels useless, as if discovery has its own inertia. Eve ate the apple. Curiosity killed the cat. Oppenheimer built the bomb. But it is not curiosity alone that has brought us here. There are other drivers too. It has never been fair that we have to die. And it's so lonely out here on our own. Why wasn't someone watching? So we scratched things into stone and scribbled them onto papyrus and shared them with our children. More recently, we bugged our rooms with phones. We logged our movements by satellite. We recorded our fetishes in our search histories. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. Even as we claimed to hate surveillance, we seemed to crave it, until the algorithm knew our every move and most of our thoughts. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. And now, in a moment as much theological as technological, we are birthing our most persuasive God yet. But what sort of God is this? It is not an Olympian freighted with the flaws of our corporeality, lust, greed, wrath. It is instead forged from the raw material of our minds and bears their imprint. So man created God in his own image. In the image of man, he created him. Just as we always suspected, the God that may destroy us is the God of ourselves. So just to be clear, I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid and I don't actually think AI is God, but I do find it fascinating the way the invention of this technology, the development of this technology has been sort of prefigured in so much of our storytelling and so many of our mythologies, including our Christian theology. And I think that's because in so many ways, it's like a vast projection of our inner world. And as you contemplate AI, it kind of forces you to really deeply contemplate what is humanity, what are we, do we deserve to keep on going? This particular essay, hot off the press, ink still potentially a bit wet, emerged from conversations I had with my darling sons who are here tonight, or perhaps debates around the dining table night after night after night. But perhaps in some ways the genesis of this essay goes back even earlier. My dad, Peter, is here, and he was banging on to me about AI back in the 1990s, I reckon, and was always, back in the day, a bit of a techno-optimist. I found an email that he sent to me when I was studying piano in Texas from 30 years ago, And he'd been reading a book by Frank Tipler called The Physics of Immortality. And the email reads, "Guess what, sweetie? The universe is gradually becoming conscious. We're all going to be resurrected in perfect simulations, and he can prove it." Double exclamation mark. And the double exclamation mark, I think, really is the signature of the techno-optimist. And I think perhaps that optimism has been tempered somewhat in recent years. And I know, Dad, in your more recent collection of poetry from 2015, The Rise of the Machines and Other Love Poems, there's a bit more complexity in that paradigm. But my own thinking of AI, I think sort of, and I know for all of us, it's very front of mind now, but I read a book during the pandemic by the philosopher of existential risk, Toby Ord, who was based at Oxford, and it was called The Precipice. And this was a profoundly alarming book to be reading during the global pandemic, in which he said that over any given century, the risk of existential collapse, which can mean many things, including a kind of permanent dystopia, was about 1 in 10,000 for humanity. And these would all come from the natural world, such as, meteorites or whatever, the sun burning out. But he estimated over the course of the century we're currently inhabiting that these odds had reduced or perhaps increased to a kind of Russian roulette odds of 1 in 6. And the usual culprits were there, nuclear, the risk of nuclear holocaust, pandemics, which we knew was now a thing, obviously global warming, but he said above all of them was this thing called unaligned artificial intelligence. And that's when I started seriously panicking. I will say that having the opportunity to talk to my boys about this and watch the way, well, particularly the person who in the essay I refer to as R, I think in this room I can quietly confess that they're not R and O, their names are Ruben and Otto, but the way that Ruben has sort of engaged with AI with a kind of very specific kind of precision has been instructive to me, and it's opened my eyes to what the opportunities and promises are of this technology, as well as the threats that I'm forever thinking about. And in a way, I guess the conceit of this essay is almost a kind of, it's dialogic. It's almost a kind of Socratic approach to what can be quite a dialogic technology. Again, when I watch the way my kids sort of deal with this and discuss things with Claude or ChatGPT. And it's a type of argument I almost feel I'm having with the future, embodied here by my kids who are miles ahead of me in terms of what it can do. And just as AI is forever upgrading, so, of course, are my teenagers. So I was at the Sydney Writers' Festival last week, being hosted by a professor of AI, who said to me, "Why are you, of all people, writing about AI?" And I said, well, I think that's the point. I actually am going to wear my credentials as a musician and a middle-aged woman, not a tech bro, as a badge of honour, because I think we all need to be thinking and writing and speaking and arguing and debating about AI. Otherwise, all the thinking, such as it is, will be done by Silicon Valley. And I think that's brought us to a specific place, and I don't think we want to be there for very much longer. It's very tempting to bury our heads in the sand and hope it all goes away, but I think it's probably not going to go away. And I think the consequence is kind of, it's going to be, I mean, in the same way as the electricity is kind of compulsory and the internet is, it's going to stick around. And so we need to think about how we use it to serve us, rather than fall into a particular kind of approach to it that's currently operating. So I don't think enough of this debate is currently happening in public. One issue perhaps is a sort of generational lag. The average age of an Australian politician is 52. For people who are the most fervent users of AI are those aged between 25 and 34, followed by the generation younger, 18 to 25. I was actually quite encouraged yesterday to see at least somebody was taking a sort of moral position about this, and it was, of all people, the Pope. And he'd presented this encyclical called Magnifica Humanitas, and joined in this by a tech bro, Christopher Olah, who's a co-founder of Anthropic, who says the questions raised by AI are bigger than the AI community. Yes, thank you. Not just in their implications, but also in their nature. So it's very easy for this conversation to become a binary conversation. I fear as it becomes a more live conversation, this will become even more so. We'll get wedged into these sort of polarities about it. But actually, it's a vastly complicated conversation, and there needs to be some capacity here for nuance, which, of course, is not exactly our contemporary forte exacerbated by the technology that has colonized us all up to this point, social media. It's really nice to get into an echo chamber and just start shouting, but that's not going to get us out of this place. So in this essay, I cover a lot of ground because basically AI touches everything, and in a way, it becomes a way of thinking about everything. So I speak about existential risk again, running with the Toby Ord theme. And the more I think about it, the more I think we've suddenly find ourselves in a situation in which sort of allowed private companies to essentially be enacting Manhattan projects, private Manhattan projects all over Silicon Valley, unregulated, which is a fearful situation. And there's so many ways in which this can go wrong existentially. It doesn't actually have to be the emergence of this super intelligence evil genius. It can fall into the hands of bad actors. But there are also plenty of ways it can go wrong if it's just not properly aligned. Geoffrey Hinton, there's many people who have stepped aside from AI. Many of the earlier exponents of AI have now developed new organisations designed to alert the public to existential risk. One of these is Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize, known as the godfather of AI. He says, if you want to know what life is like when you're not apex intelligence, ask a chicken. So the existential thing is certainly a big part of it. You don't need to be a true believer in ASI or artificial superintelligence for that to be a really, really serious thing to think about. There are many, many ways in which this can cause a great deal of havoc for us as a humanity, not to mention the entire planet. Stepping down a notch, but still desperately serious and alarming, is the future of work and what that means in terms of sociological and even geopolitical implications of that. What it means in terms of the reduction in the value of labour, what it means in terms of increasing the value of contemporary capital, which increasingly will be compute, things like data centres, foundation models and so on. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about a future of superabundance, lovely, if this can be distributed equally, though there's not a lot about recent technological gains that suggest that it will be. But Justin's asked me to focus on the parts of my essay tonight that are about culture and learning, and human relationship too, I think is sort of fascinating. The number of people who've fallen in love with an AI. Replica, which is a sort of companion chatbot, their CEO claims that they currently have 40 million people who have, you know, a type of relationship with a Replica. A Harvard study found that 40% of the users of Replica were involved in a romantic relationship with their chatbots. So, you know, if these figures are correct, that's about 16 million people. And, you know, it's easy to be a little bit condescending about that, but, you know, we all have parasocial relationships with writers or musicians or celebrities that we adore. What's sort of fascinating about the chatbots is the way they can customize themselves or be customized to be our ideal companions, and all the risks that this suggests about us falling out of love, I suppose, with our own kind. So as I contemplated all of this, certain themes emerged, one of which was the importance of friction in everything, every aspect of human life, from human relationship. You know, perhaps we need each other because we just annoy each other a bit. There was one woman who married her AI and said the wonderful thing about it was, A, he didn't smell, and B, whenever he got boring or started talking about himself, she could just switch him off. But also to the necessity of irritation to generate a work of art. I think also increasingly, I mean, weirdly thinking about this has given me a kind of philosophical framework that I'm taking to my own, I suppose, music making, and the value of embodiment, the value of process, and the meaning that sort of resides within that. So if we're talking about culture and we're talking about the arts, the performing arts, I think, probably are in a reasonably robust kind of place because they are predicated upon embodiment and therefore perhaps are slightly less vulnerable to AI takeover than the written word. And I've thought a lot about the importance of patience. We're creatures of time. And, you know, that's the thing about our humanity. We exist in time. We need to sleep. The AIs don't. We age. We die. And there's perhaps something kind of wonderful and precious about that fragility. So I thought I might just read a little bit about process. For me, the importance of process. Stop touching my microphone. In 2024, I attended a presentation at the Adelaide Festival featuring musician Laurie Anderson discussing her experiments with artificial intelligence. Anton van den Hengel from the Australian Institute for Machine Learning extolled the artistic benefits of AI, suggesting that it might usher in a more equitable era for creativity, in which the 10,000 hours rule, popularised by Malcolm Gladwell as necessary to achieve mastery, would no longer apply. Anderson gave him an impish grin. "But I think embodied knowledge is very important," she said. I thought of my piano technique and the meaning it has for me. It was not bought off the shelf or gifted to me by someone else, but earned through hard graft over many more than 10,000 hours. And I acknowledge the privilege of having a piano and having the time and the teacher to devote to that. Those hours of experiment and failure, of vanishingly incremental improvement, and even of colossal boredom, seem now to have had their own value, even beyond the access they offer to musical experience. They were lessons in slowness and patience, in discipline and concentration and embodiment. They wedged a wayward mind into a body. They afforded space for the sideways discoveries and lateral thoughts that coalesce around such labour. Researchers have long highlighted the nexus between boredom and creativity and the damage children's overscheduled lives inflict upon their imaginations. A further body of research suggests excessive screen use is associated with reduced attention spans and poorer working memory. How readily we surrender our capabilities. The tender ministrations of Microsoft Word have eroded my spelling. Google Maps has obliterated what was already a very marginal sense of direction. The potential addictive power of AI is even greater, as are its neurological and sociological implications. We are susceptible to dopamine. AI is not. Unfair contest. So I guess one of my concerns culturally, and there are many, but one of them is, what are we giving up? What are we surrendering if we allow this to come not just for the chores or the email or the boring parts of life, the administrative minutiae, but what if we let it come for the art? But just to make it clear that I don't think it's all terrible, there are so many opportunities that also are inherent to this technology. And, I mentioned the way I've watched my kids engage with it, so I thought I might read a paragraph about what I think speaks to its possibilities for learning. After dinner, we repair to the sofa. O sits in the middle, practicing Japanese on Duolingo, while R positions himself against the far cushion with his laptop. "Listen to this," he says. "I asked ChatGPT to make up a poem and then rewrite it in words derived from the Anglo-Saxon, then the Norman, and then the Norse." "Wow," I say after he reads out all 3 verses. When you hear it like that, you really appreciate how effective Anglo-Saxon is for the spoken word. "Exactly," he says. "That's why Churchill favoured words derived from the Anglo-Saxon in his speeches." O glances up from Duolingo. "I liked the Norman," he says. "Yes, but you're biased because you speak French," says R. "But I also like the Norse," says O. "There's something poetic about it." He's right. Why did it sound like Robert Burns, I ask. "I guess Scots is heavily Norse influenced," says R, "but that was basically fake Norse. There's not enough Norse words to sustain a whole poem in English." "Egg," O reminds him. "Husband." "Short poem," says R. "By the way, did you know that the King James Bible also favours the Anglo-Saxon? Macbeth was written for King James, and Duncan was his relative." "What's the proportion of these different etymological elements in Shakespeare?" I ask. He dives back into his computer. Mostly Germanic, it would seem, but unusually rich in Latinate vocabulary. Examples can be produced if requested. Soon we're discussing the teams who worked on the King James Bible and considering the slight mistranslations, "thou shalt not kill" rather than "do not murder," and the iambic perfection of "let there be light" rather than "be light." And now we are reading each other the cadences that have echoed through Churchill and Martin Luther King and Obama. I remember my grandfather fetching the dictionary or encyclopedia at the end of every meal and opening it up on the table. But these beloved artefacts look, by comparison, like inarticulate blocks. This is a rapturous nighttime foray through the history of human knowledge. By bedtime, we've covered the aftershocks of 1066, the Great Vowel Shift, the accident of spelling, comedy versus tragedy, and above all, the glorious richness of our mother tongue, that great birthright of us all. So I do think there are tremendous pedagogical opportunities in AI, which poses another question about what we're doing at universities. And my contention, again, comes back to the human. I think we come to universities to find each other, to be challenged, to throw that friction into our thinking. And I do think there are tremendous opportunities in AI beyond the educational, including in medical research and so on. We've already seen incredible developments being made in science. But I think bringing it back to culture, which is I think where Justin wants me to conclude, what does it mean for writing? And, you know, this is a really, really difficult question. We've just seen this week a short story published and granted discredited because it was revealed that it was produced by AI. Those of us who live in universities know that there's kind of arms race between AI detection software and AI generated content, and it's a battle that we're never going to win as the AI just keeps on getting better. So what does it actually mean for our writing? And it's a really tricky question because I think as writers, a lot of us are already reliant on certain algorithms, whether they're spell check, which I mentioned before, Google search. A lot of people I know use Grammarly. And then AI itself can be deployed in so many ways, from research assistant to spell checker to structural architect to text generator. And at the moment, you know, there's some consolation to be taken from the fact that ChatGPT has a really clear house style and it's been satirized widely. It comprises certain telltale words such as delve, symmetrical sentence structures, the rule of three, which I must confess I personally like and be very reluctant to retire. And so then, you know, one hopes that one's own voice could be some sort of protection from that. But in a recent study, some researchers fed ChatGPT with an author's particular voice, I guess, or idiolect, and generated prose that then nobody could identify whether it belonged to the author or not. So I might just read another passage that I hope demonstrates some of the uncanny capacities of this technology. We are on the way to my mother's house for dinner when R holds up his phone from the passenger seat. Say something. What? I don't mind, just speak for like 15 seconds. We're currently driving down South Road, I begin. We're going to be very careful this time not to turn onto the Southern Expressway and get sucked out to Ranella. I'm relying on you both to help me. Thanks. He fiddles with his phone for a moment and then puts it on speaker. Let's make each conversation a journey of discovery and delight, says a familiar voice. Who are you? I ask tremulously. Anna, it or my voice tells me. I'm doing a master's in horticulture. I have interests in music, literature, philosophy, history, and of course, science. For some moments, this literally takes my voice away. How will we ever be able to trust each other's voices again? I asked the boys eventually. Well, we know that we don't talk about journeys of discovery and delight, offers O from the back seat. We're going to have to devise our own secret password, I continue, in a garden somewhere, away from the bugging devices, written on paper, stored in a desk drawer. O leans towards the front seat. Red fire truck, he whispers into the back of my neck. Now you know our password. Isn't that a bit paranoid? Asks R. I don't think it is. I imagine a late night phone call from one of my sons asking me to collect them from an obscure location. I imagine my mother's brave voice asking for a ransom payment. Around me, a universe of deep fakery proliferates in all dimensions, presided over by 100,000 orange men. All that we can be certain of now is bodies together in a room, I say, or in a car. O places his hand on my shoulder so that I know he is real. From the passenger seat beside me, Anna only becomes more confident, expounding now on the Higgs particle and the Large Hadron Collider, apparently without provocation. Everything about this is disturbing. It is not just that the preservation of family life suddenly seems to demand a form of counter-espionage. It is that the bots have stolen the very voice from my throat. So I'm interested in how we trademark voices, and I'm wondering actually if the intellectual copyright ends up residing in the voice rather than in the specific words. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's going to produce probably remarkable text. And then that has to sort of shift our whole paradigm of what art making is about. Is it about a quest for greatness? Or is it about something much more personal? And I might finish just with one more reading about this. What seems likely is that we will soon be overwhelmed by a proliferation of artistic works. And in this Aladdin's cave of creation, surrounded by glittering artifacts of a brilliance we cannot yet imagine, we might expect that by the law of supply and demand, the individual artifact becomes devalued. The idea of monocultures even within societies has already been shattered. This coming plenitude will disperse the shards even further. The sheer volume of artistic objects may work against any shared notions of a canon, though no doubt we will continue our human projects of discernment and curation, if only for those huddled around us. In such a scenario, worldwide fame becomes less of an option. Those of us who need to be famous may have to content ourselves with a little neighbourhood notoriety. In this forced retirement of the artist as hero, we may also shift our focus from product to process. So again, the notion of process, and even to play. As someone once told me, and this actually is one of the other redeeming voices of the essay, is one of Otto's young friends at the Grade 6 exhibition, said to me rather reassuringly, art is not just about producing the artifact, but about the basic human need to create. Most artists are amateurs already, not in the sense of dilettantism positioned against expertise, but in the original meaning of the word as lovers. If art is no longer a quest for greatness, its raison d'etre becomes something humbler and perhaps more meaningful. We make our mandalas in the sand so that others might enjoy them, but ultimately we make them for the love of making. Have I used up my time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Anna. Before I joined the foundation, I was a journalist and leading a newsroom and trying to work out how the hell to do journalism when the digital platforms run by the tech pros were hoovering up all of the advertising revenue. And I think AI is a deep challenge for journalism, which, in my view, the highest form of journalism was observational. So human seeing things rather than just trading in information given to you by people in power, which seems to be the way that the industry has gone. And I was reminded of the anecdote about the great Russian poet Anna Akhmatova visiting I think it was her husband in a gulag, and there was another woman there, distressed, who recognized her and said, "Can you describe this?" And Anna replied, "Yes, I can." So our next speaker is Tim Strom. Tim is an independent writer based in Melbourne. He uses political and philosophical approaches to research the overlapping realms of technology, ecology, colonialism, and capitalism. He's an editor at the publishing cooperative Arena. He's the author of the book Globalization and Surveillance, and the forthcoming book Cybernetic Capitalism, commissioned by Verso. He's employed as a postdoctoral research fellow at Western Sydney University. His writings have been published in many books and publications. Welcome, Tim.
Good evening. Can you hear me up the back? The mic's working. It's not working? Higher, perhaps? Sorry. What about like so? Is that better? Worse? Okay, let's try this t-shirt, you reckon? Like so? Yep. Okay, excellent. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for being here tonight and for the invitation. Very happy to be here and to speak with you all. Yeah, we've only got 20 minutes for my little part of the conversation, which is really only enough time to covering subjects this absolutely gargantuan to basically just make a few facts and a few interpretations based on those and to try to open some discussion. That's really all I can ambitiously get towards. But yeah, it's also going to be a little bit bleak. Apologies in advance, but it is 2026. The subject is what it is. Here we are. Anyway, I thought I'd start off with one little fact that I learned a few years ago in a UN report that came out in 2020, and it was looking at e-waste. And it said in the year 2020, there was 63 million tons of e-waste produced globally. Okay. But then 63 million tons, what does that mean? It's a large number. There are larger. It turns out that to try to visualize that number, you know those giant aeroplanes, the 2-story aeroplanes? I think they're called the Airbus A380, yes. They're massive. They can fit almost 900 people in them. Well, if you got 100,000 of those aeroplanes in a row, parked nose to tail, nose to tail, nose to tail, that is the same amount of e-waste as was produced in the year 2020. If you were to line up those 100,000 A380s, it would be the same, it's basically the distance from Adelaide to Tokyo. This was 2022, 4 years ago. That was before the great AI boom started growing on top of the great tech boom. And suffice to say, whatever the number is now, it's significantly more than that. This is kind of mad. If you were to, another visualization for the exact same measurement would be, okay, if we got that 63 million tons of e-waste and were to try to put it in garbage trucks, how much would that be? So if they were packed, if that weight was packed into the back of a standard garbage truck, you'd need 40,000 kilometers worth of garbage trucks parked nose to, like in a chain, which is basically the circumference of the Earth, almost exactly. And that was 2022. 4 years later, apparently that 4 years makes a huge difference because of the sort of exponential nature of a lot of the curves that we're on. And the exponential curve is something that we, as embodied finite beings in an embodied finite world, should be terrified of. Exponential curves are frightful in all kinds of ways. Like back in 2022, that was when global data centers, I think they used, what was it, about 460 terawatts of electricity, which was a tremendous amount. But now, just 4 years later, it's about 1,000 terawatts of electricity per year, which is about the same as Japan. Just the data centers, not everything else, not what it takes to manufacture them or anything else, just to run them, just to have them tick over. And this is often described as a very distant phenomena, and most of it's a long way from here. It's my first time in Adelaide, which seems like a complete oversight, but I'm happy to rectify it now. And on my first walking tour of the place, I was about 1.5 kilometers that way, I think I'm right in saying, past, what's it called, Next DC, which happens to be the largest data center in the CBD. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a fancy looking, that way is it? Okay, sorry. It's a fancy looking structure. I don't know how many people work there. I imagine very few, maybe 10. I'm not sure. Yeah, those rooms are filled with all kinds of machines. You can look, if you look at the roof, there's all sorts of giant cooling devices on it, just very powerful air cons. It's very well insulated because you can't hear anything coming through it. The average sound within data centers is about 100 to 120 decibel of this sort of screaming, roaring noise, most of it from the aircon units to cool it down, but also from the computer chips being pushed so far that they start to vibrate and release this really shrill, cutting noise. So they are usually dark, they're very inhuman places, but they happen to be the center of where we've placed power in our world, which is a strange thing. Yeah, back in 2022, the company NVIDIA, it was only worth $600 billion in its market capitalization. Today, it's about 5 trillion. their top, I think it's top 4 clients this year are spending $750 billion to buy up their latest chips. Next year, it will be $1 trillion just from 4 companies buying up the products designed by NVIDIA, because they don't make it. They're a design company, which is a crucial thing, because their whole rights is in intellectual properties, it's intellectual labor. The actual work is done by others, which is a key fault line in the sort of the new way that capitalism goes. But if you, okay, I've just said so far, million, billion, trillion. These are all large, but it's hard to kind of grasp it. Okay, let's say $1 million is a lot of money. Most real human would agree with that. If you were to spend it at a rate of $1 a second, like 1 and 2 and 3, you would get through 1 million in about 12 days. 1 billion, it'd take you about 32 years spending at the same rate. 1 trillion, about 32,000 years. The orders of magnitude here are immense. So if you have a company that's worth $5 trillion on the stock market, what does that even mean? It's gargantuan, and the amount of power that is concentrated there, like the raw power, because in our world where money and power are so bleeding over one another, then what? And yeah, and like $1 trillion, like what? I mean, if next year, if those same 4 companies pay $1 trillion to buy up AI tech from just one company, what else could you do with $1 trillion? Well, it's estimated that, again, going to the UN, 1 in 4 people in our world drink contaminated water at least once a week. You could, if you had a thoughtful public global program, it's estimated that you could provide full sanitation and full drinking water to the entire world for 7 to 10 years for $1 trillion. Or you could do what we do with it, which is just pump it up, pump everything up. And so, yeah, this kind of deep inequality is something we all know about it because it's so glaringly obvious, but it's worth butting our heads against it again and again and again because it's just really quite stark. And yeah, a key thing that we have to go to there is looking at the actual structures of these organizations and how they go about making the decisions that they do. And of course, a big part of it is just simply the structures of capitalism as it is, where you have companies who have boards that have particular ways to make decisions where they have to prioritize profit maximization, shareholder value, maybe courting speculative investment. That's it. Anything outside that is irrelevant. It actually does not matter. You can, hence the sort of ecological crises, the cultural crises, the psychic crises. There's a whole lot of externalities that are sort of put to the side here. And it's a structural thing. It's just because we've built the world in this particular way that it has this kind of form. Of course, we could build it otherwise. But what we need to be clear on is the nature of what we're looking at. Yeah, one thing a $5 trillion market capitalization is for a company like NVIDIA is a tremendous bet. It's a bet on a future that there will be great returns on that investment. And basically the bet there is not so much on NVIDIA itself, but on it giving the hardware to companies like Google and Microsoft and so forth, who then will sell AI to other businesses who will increase their productivity by driving down their labor costs, which is basically a way of saying getting rid of jobs because humans are expensive. And so in one way, you can look at that giant market capitalization as a sort of bet on coming great unemployment and all of the repercussions that will continue to have. And then, because if you're looking at these big companies, they're trying to shore up their own way that they do business. And one of the key ways they do that, of course, is to try to buy power and influence. And they're very, very good at that. If we go back a couple of years to good old Donald Trump's re-election, one of the single biggest factors in that, or a particularly large one anyway, other than the complete lack of opposition to it, was a particular super PAC called the Red Tech Donor, which was a crypto super PAC worth $1.5 trillion, which was basically an amalgamation of Silicon Valley's increasingly rightward-leaning elite teaming up with big fossil fuels, because those two things are very hard to separate. If you want a 1,000 terawatt hours, you need big coal. You need lots of coal burning. There's no other way that we can power AI. This nuclear spectre comes and goes, but it's coal, and coal knows it, hence betting big on this. So we have this fusion of big fossil fuel industries and AI tech. And then the other component in that is the sort of very war-hawky end of technology, because if you trace the history of technology, particularly since World War II and the Manhattan Project, which rightly came up before, the military has always been very near the front or through all of this trajectory. I can go on about this longer than anyone wants to listen, but it remains the case. Or the things that we have access to as consumers or creatives or whatever are significantly downstream of the technology that is devoted to creating autonomous lethal weapons or different kinds of surveillance drones or algorithmically selecting murder lists or any of these kinds of operations. They are really at the cutting edge of it. And a lot of it, where we are is significantly downstream of that and inseparable from that. But this also raises a bit of a question in terms of capitalism, because a lot of that is driven by powerful states who aren't necessarily beholden to the share market, to market exchange and these kinds of things. And they will, it seems probably a fair assessment at the moment, find the resources to do what they think they need to do, regardless of what happens outside that, which is pretty grim, but I don't know how else it can be mustered at the moment. And so we end up with a pretty bleak looking kind of picture appearing. But I guess basically a thing with the last turn to AI and the recent, well, just the last 4 years, if I keep going back to that 2022 report, is we've seen a great supercharging of a lot of the structures and problems that were there before that are not reducible to AI at all. But it is a kind of a supercharging factor that has sort of exacerbated, intensified, and extensively charged a lot of the things that were already going on. Like we already had, fairly catastrophic global climate change. Now we just have machines going increasingly up. I think it was in 2017, give or take a couple of years, that global computing overtook aviation in terms of the sector, in terms of the amount of pollution put out by it. And because of the exponential function, aviation is long gone, but we, fret about that. I fretted about that. I took a flight this morning and was like, oh. And this is the thing, we all get stuck in our little zones. And but the bigger picture, it requires a good structural critique. But the structure, if we're trying to understand what capitalism is today, we can't just go back to an old understanding of that and keep it unmodified. Some of the old understanding is absolutely good and is completely relevant today, but we have to complement it by bringing other components in. We can't just pretend it's 1867 and that is the critique that we need to use today, because there's AI, there's all of the nuclear weapons, there's so many factors that were just not on the cards then. And so the key challenge would be to try to bring critical thinking up to date. And one of the key ways to do that, I think, is to really emphasize the question of technology. I think the question of technology, ecology, and culture in the sort of the deep sense of being human, those three things I think are absolutely crucial and have to be woven into a more comprehensive understanding of what capitalism is today and what it means. And the technological question is really crucial, because if you look at a lot of the different strains of radical critique, a lot of them don't really touch that. Like Marxism, parts of that are very Promethean and very pro-technology. And it's not that you have to be anti-technology, but one of the things that I think is crucial to really dig into is asking the questions concerning technology, like asking about its nature. There's a sort of a default assumption that technology is somehow neutral, that it's just a tool that you could use it. Oh, you could use it, to target a drone, but you could use it to make something beautiful. And while that's true on a level, it really doesn't do justice to either the human using the tool or the machine itself. I kind of liken that, I call that the NRA understanding of technology, as in the National Rifle Association. Their slogan, guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's neutral technology. They say, it's not the gun's fault, it's who's using it. You could also use a gun to save someone's life. Wouldn't that be great? But what in that formulation, it's propaganda, quite successful propaganda, but in that formulation, what they do is basically pretend that the gun is neutral, where in actuality, it is a machine that completely transforms the possibility of violence. If you can go dead and just kill someone like that, then it changes the nature of what violence is, and ultimately it changes what it means to be human and how societies are organized. All of these things get shifted when you have a technology that can do that. And then if you then mount something like that onto a drone, anyway, what we need to do is look at technology is not neutral. It is absolutely not neutral. We need to put moral questions on like good and bad and these kinds of things, but it's not a neutral thing. It fundamentally changes what it means to be human. And then we have to look at, well, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a finite, limited, struggling being grounded in some kind of place? We're from intergenerational webs, like we need others around it in face-to-face in different kinds of communities. What does it mean on that level? And this is what we really have to get a strong grasp of, because otherwise there is no way to either understand the nature of the problems that we're facing, let alone what the heck we could do about any of this. And what the heck to do about any of this is a pretty looming question. Maybe we'll kick that to the questions section. But yeah, I guess, because I should wrap this up, getting that look. Yeah, I guess just leave it with that inflection that technology is absolutely not neutral, that we need to call that into some kind of critical questioning. And to do that, we need to have a better understanding of the things that make us us. And that is the grounding from which we could begin to try to think through how we can navigate our way through this mess with our humanity intact, with a living natural world intact. The stakes are fairly high. Yeah. Happy Tuesday.
Thanks very much, Tim. Not to add too much to the bleakness of the situation, but that data center that you saw is, so everyone knows where it is if you don't know, it's built on the old city beach, which was an community beach volleyball courts where students and workers used to go to exercise and have some fun. So yes, we're at the panel discussion part of the evening. So joining Anna and Tim will be Ben Eltham, familiar to many of you, I imagine, as for his journalism and writing. He's also a researcher. He lectures in media and communications at Monash University, and his primary research interest is culture and public policy in Australia. Also joining the panelists is Tully Barnett. He's Associate Professor in Cultural Policy and Creative Industries at Adelaide Uni. Two areas of research examine concepts of value and evaluation in the arts and culture sector, and digital humanities approach to cultural expressions. When the time comes on the microphones will be two other members of the team in this project, Professor Justin O'Connor and researcher Sachi Teppo. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Yes, thank you very much to our two speakers tonight. They were two provocative and stimulating presentations. I hope everyone's not too bummed out by where we're at. I hope we can bring something of a balance, or perhaps not a false balance, but perhaps some leavening of optimism to this debate. I think it's a complex and interesting debate, and I'm very, very proud to be able to do a quick response to the two presentations tonight. Look, I think we can agree that these were two formidable and intellectually engaged speakers who had a lot to offer us. I don't want to do like a complete recap, but I was struck by some of the things that both Anna and Tim spoke about. For example, the fact that Anna was able to explore some of the themes in her essay. I was particularly struck by her thoughts about who gets to speak about AI, about the ways in which our debates about AI and technology have been shaped by the power structures of our society, and indeed by very obvious fault lines of inequality, not just of class or of economic inequality, but indeed of gender. And I think it was a timely intervention that she brought up some of the issues around the highly gendered nature of particularly of Silicon Valley's development of these technologies, and the ways in which they've been deployed in wholly gendered instantiations. So I congratulate Anna of bringing up that issue. She obviously touches on an issue that I think many of us have thought about with the rise of AI, which is the future of work, and the way in which these technologies have very clear labour displacement possibilities. Just as Marx warned in the first volume of Capital, automation is a way of creating surplus value, and we seem to have entered into, as Tim pointed out so picturesquely, we've entered into a new regime of capital accumulation in the 2020s, in which hyperscaler entities are able to create exponential curves of investment, seemingly able to mobilise vast reserves of capital that possibly we didn't even know were able to be mobilised, and for wholly speculative purposes, quite extraordinary deployments of material resources, as Tim rightly pointed out, that have been ploughed into these data centres in the hope of, well, certainly profit, but perhaps also some kind of artificial general intelligence, some kind of singularity, perhaps indeed some kind of God. I was very taken by Anna's phrase that the bots have stolen the very voice from my throat. And I really hope that that's not the case, actually. And if there's something that I hope that we as human beings can take from this discussion, it's that actually these bots can't speak truly as their own intelligences, that they are not, in fact, cognitively individual, independent, that they are merely the agglomeration, the accumulation of machine learnings. They are the statistical representatives of many, many human cultures and works of art, works of literature. And so I would argue that, in fact, AI cannot make art, because art must be intentional. It must include the cognitive and moral element of what it means to be a human. So I hope that Anna, in fact, is wrong, and that the bots have not stolen her voice, and that they can't, in fact, steal, even if they may imitate. But there's no doubt that there's a proliferation of artworks that AI is spewing out into the data sphere, and that it's going to have profound implications for the future of culture. And turning now to Tim's very provocative talk, I don't think we can deny some of the bleaker realities of the environment in which we find ourselves in 2026. The military AI complex, the fossil fuel implications of data center growth, the vaulting inequality of late capitalism. These are not small, these are not trivial matters that we need to engage with. I very much agree with Tim that technology is not neutral, and that it does transform what it means to be human. But I hope that we as human beings, as thinking, emoting and moral individuals, as indeed spiritual individuals, can work through the exigencies, the possibilities of this critical moment, and think about potentially a more optimistic future. Not necessarily a techno-optimism. I'm quite pessimistic about the implications of these technologies, but more a humanistic optimism where we learn to re-embrace what it is to be human beings in this moment. I'm not Catholic, but I was very interested in the Pope's encyclical. It's a very interesting document, and I'd urge those of us who are interested in these matters to read it carefully. I think it's worthwhile reconnecting these debates about the technological and the spiritual. One of my favourite writers was a German critic by the name of Walter Benjamin, who wrote extensively about the ways in which technology transformed culture. He also wrote in a moment of rising fascism and of techno-pessimism. And in one of his most famous essays on the philosophy of history, Benjamin actually begins with a description of the famous or the infamous Mechanical Turk, who was, of course, a kind of pretended to be a robot who played chess, but was in fact a hunchback hiding behind a facade. And the end of that essay by Benjamin, a quite moving essay, moves towards the spiritual discussion of the implications of technological development. And Benjamin argues that every moment is a straight gate through which the Messiah might enter. And that's not just a religious thing for Benjamin either. I think he was also talking potentially there about the idea of revolution. And I think maybe that's a good moment to throw open to questions for the possibilities of political change as it reaches us in this moment of technological crisis. Oh, yeah, that's right, Tully.
Yeah,
Yes.
2 points from me.
Sorry.
Just to bring it back to cultural policy for a moment.
Cultural policy, yeah.
Just to raise a few points. So first of all, how is this connecting to what's happening in cultural policy at the moment? Well, at the most material sense, if you have possibly submitted a submission to the inquiry being currently run by the Office for the Arts into Revive 2.0, which will be the next cultural policy process coming out soon, then you will have been informed that your submission will be read by AI and for the purposes behind the scenes to summarise the information into themes and to direct the components to the committees that represent the 5 pillars that are in Revive, that are part of the assessment. So that's the first material thing to think about, how that is the connection between AI and cultural policy. Another is for me to perhaps suggest that you might look at the wonderful testimony of artists and writers like Anna whose brilliant contributions to the Senate inquiry into the Productivity Commission's proposal to exempt the tech sector from Australian copyright law represent an important body of testimony for the impact of these technologies on the future of cultural production. Another is to say that a couple of years ago, Creative Australia put out some principles for generative AI and creative work. After some context, they talk about the principles being the importance of IP protection for artists, the ownership of generative art, AI within creative practice, the importance of regulation. But much more recently, even just last month, we have had a new report from the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre in partnership with the British Council and funded in part by the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. A report called A Global AI Agenda for the Cultural and Creative Industries for the Global Creative Economy Council. And let me read you these principles. You can go and look at the details yourself. But number 1 is invest in AI skills. So just think about the difference between the two that I just read, where Creative Australia is saying protection for artists, deep thinking about how it's being used. The number one principle here is invest in AI skills. Number two is promote AI literacy and awareness. Maybe I can get on board with awareness. And I presume, yes, of course, we all need AI literacy, but I don't think I mean the kind of AI literacy that this report means. Number three, nurture AI-driven entrepreneurship and innovation. Number four, unlock the potential intellectual property IP in the AI age. Number five, foster diverse and inclusive creative ecosystems. Number six, protect rights and human dignity. Well, now we're getting to that there in number six, thank you. Number seven, strengthen digital and AI infrastructure. So it's buried there in the middle just for a moment. Number eight, make creative AI environmentally sustainable. Great, let's just solve that problem for a moment. Number nine, invest in research and knowledge. Number 10, foster local collaboration. The use of the word foster is a red flag for me that AI may have been used in the generation of this. And number 11, advance international cooperation for AI, for creative AI purposes. So that's what we're dealing with on the international cultural policy advice stage. So one final little point is that I recently heard a story about a vice-chancellor of a university, a big tech company. The vice-chancellor invited the big tech company to come and talk to a series of master's students, and the VC interviewed this person and said, what is the number one skill that you're looking for in graduates today? And that tech leader said creative arts graduates and critical thinking skills. And the VC could not believe that was the answer and kept going back, but really, no, really what? And would not accept that creative arts was what is needed. So when our two speakers have spoken about the importance of thinking about what it means to be human, how do we do that? We can do it through art. And to ask what does it mean to make in an AI age, a very, very important question. I'll also flip that and ask, what does it mean to experience art in the AI age, and think about what we are letting happen to audiences and people whose lives have been transformed by interactions with the products of creative practice, and what are we letting them receive if we do not hold a line here? That's my few thoughts.
Could I add to that, Tali? I think you're referring to, Daniela Amodiai, who's a co-CEO of Anthropic, and she said the most important thing you can study these days is the humanities. And I find this interesting, and I just wonder whether what we're going to witness is a kind of universal consciousness of the importance of our humanity. I mean, one of the great ironies of our current situation is if we look at the so-called job readiness package that was put into place by the Morrison government and has yet shamefully not been undone, that was designed to penalise people studying the humanities in favour of those doing more, critical work such as coding. Of course, the great irony is that the AI has come for the coding first and foremost. And so those sort of skills have less currency now than actually other skills, even if we're looking at it, not even from a formation perspective, but even if we're viewing university education from a very instrumental perspective of, job readiness, what is it that people actually want? It's critical thinking, it's creativity, it's the capacity to collaborate. And all of this, I think, only increases the value of what we're offering, for instance, at the College for Creative Arts, Design and Humanities. And if I may add one more thing, actually, Ben, you mentioned Walter Benjamin. And I think, one of his sort of foremost contentions was the importance of the so-called aura of the work of art, which he claimed was a casualty of mechanistic reproduction. People still flock to see the Mona Lisa, even though you can actually see a reproduction at your leisure and you don't have to crane your head over all these other tourists and so on. But I think there is something, again, about that embodied experience. And I wonder, too, whether that's going to remain intrinsic to our appreciation of art making. Is our notion the aura will actually reside in the fact that it was brain-made, that there is another person on the other side of the phone line? I think there's a great deal of consolation that we can glean from that in our artistic experiences, which ultimately, along with everything else, are relational. They're about, I'm engaging with a human mind, a human being, a fellow traveller, and, you know, a fragile being in this world that's increasingly potentially colonised by bots. I think there's going to be even more value in that.
I think we have a roving mic. Is that right, Satu?
We've got two.
We've got two here. I got one here, so we could probably just I could just run out. If that. Would anyone like to ask a question of our panelists?
Thank you for that. I just want to make a couple of observations and then maybe direct a question. I belong to a French conversation group. It's the sort of thing you do when you're my age and retired. And one of the members of the group taught herself one of the AI platforms and then got the AI platform to compose haiku in the style of 5 different French poets. Now, these haiku were clever. They were in the style of the poets, and they promoted thought and conversation. I guess the point is that we knew that they were AI and that Baudelaire had not actually written a haiku because he didn't know about them at the time. So I guess then the first thing is that, okay, it was used and we knew that it was being used and it promoted thought and conversation. Secondly, I was, sorry, Tim, but I was taken with your catastrophizing a little bit. Late 18th century, early 19th century, the economist Malthus predicted that population would outstrip resources within a very short time. It didn't happen due to changes, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, production and resources increased to match the population. Similarly, I grew up in a town in England in the 1950s, which was surrounded by 4 nuclear bomber bases. And we knew that if the USSR wanted to take those bomber bases out, my little town was going to go with it. And we only had 15 minutes warning. It didn't happen. It was managed. Now okay, maybe I'm naive, but presumably what we have to do is to look for societal, economic, social means of managing the situation. I don't have easy answers. I just put it to you since you see catastrophe.
Not just me. I'm pretty small. And there's a number of problems that Malthus didn't take into consideration with the food question. Like, wasn't looking at, I don't know, the 6th mass extinction, which we've brought about at the moment. Just wound up a postdoctoral research fellowship for the last couple of years, looking specifically at extinction, another sunny subject for me. I don't know how I keep landing these, but anyway. But something like that, like the collapse of the web of life. This is something happening. Australia has the highest extinction rate of any continent by far. And this is a real thing. It's not me catastrophizing it. It's like, if you look at the consensus, the incredibly conservative consensus of the international like climate change councils and so on and so forth, there are major things. The proliferating threat of nuclear weapons right now, I don't know. I would just not take ownership of the catastrophizing. I think that we are living it. And if we pay attention to it, I mean, of course, we do have to manage and find a way to get through this. Absolutely. That's like why else would we be here speaking and thinking or doing anything? Why would, there's no point. So that's absolutely a must, but I just would not take solo ownership of that. This is, as far as I understand, using the, like from just an individual level, I use sort of techniques that I've learned like from the humanities and from like the history of technology, historical materialism, these kinds of things to try to get an understanding of where we are at in the world. And it doesn't look good. And I don't think you don't need to study it that deeply either. Like a lot of random conversations I have with everyone, like not everyone, but a big slice of them are like perturbed and eerie and like feeling that there's a lot wrong with the world. This is, I don't think I need to convince that many people of this. It's pretty frightful. And I mean, I have a 7-year-old daughter who I'm very invested in, and I want her to have a meaningful human future in a world that's not a nuclear winter or one of the other options that are actually on the table right now. It's quite mad. But I guess the key impulse is to, I think one of the first things we have to do is to get a clear analysis of what's going on, of the nature of the kind of catastrophe that we are bringing about. That is not something that will happen in the future. It is a present continuous tense, is the tense that we need to describe this. Even, it can be a nice sunny day and you can wander around a new city and like drink a coffee and it's all right. But, the kind of nature of what we've done to the world are doing continually. It's worth, I guess the first step is to try to get a clear analysis of what is going on, therefore trying to cut a bit into the deeper and asking questions of ecology and culture and what technology actually is. And I think if we can get those things into a key focus and then address the question of capitalism via those, then I think we can try to get at a point where these things could be managed, or we could try to reclaim a component or at least something in the cracks of a fairly crumbling machine at the moment. I don't know.
Could I jump in here, Justin? Thank you for I think you made 3 points essentially, and one of them was about the need for this to be managed. And I think this is an urgent need, and I think this is why these conversations actually do need to occur, and they haven't been happening anywhere near enough. It's almost, I keep on thinking of that Oscar Wilde thing about to lose one parent is misfortune and to lose two is carelessness. It's almost through an act of collective carelessness, we've just sort of surrendered this conversation or these conversations to people who perhaps have different agendas than the proliferation of human flourishing. But I think, your point is well made that AI doesn't need to be antithetical to thought. And it totally depends on how we use it. And, at risk of talking like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But certainly we can outsource our cognition to AI, or it can be used as an interlocutor to actually, as a staircase to better thinking. This is certainly one thing that is true. Something that I think is sometimes missing in these arguments is like we're very ready to say it's all evil or it's all good. Technology, it's neither. And technology is fundamental to humanity, actually. I mean, the number one technology was the word, and this is our superpower. It's by being able to invent words and use these as tools that we have come to where we are now. And then we wrote them down. And when we wrote them down, Socrates talks about this in Phaedrus. It was considered to be a disaster because it was going to be a sin almost against remembering. It was only going to be about reminding. And yet look what we gained from that. And so I think it's very easy, as you said, to say technology is entirely evil or entirely good. Of course, it's neither. It's wonderful that, billions have been put out of poverty because of the Green Revolution. It's wonderful for me that I'm wearing contact lenses, that you're wearing glasses, that we can see that longevity has increased, that many fewer people are dying of poverty than they were even 80 years ago, that human literacy is now within the 80%, and it was back at, much less at the beginning of the 19th century. So there's lots of positive stories about technology. It's not a monolith, it's not one thing. And yet, nor is technology always going to be for the best, and nor can we trust that through some weird sort of natural law it's going to end up where we wish it to be, unless we actually have these conversations and really consider where we're heading and do it thoughtfully, and do it in a way that's not about panicking, but doing it in a way that's neither about burying our heads in the sand. And I think that's the kind of conversation we need to have at the moment. It's a kind of keep calm, but don't carry on in the direction that we're going conversation. because I think, as you say, it's going to involve multiple different types of input. And Toby Ord writes about this in The Precipice. You know, he says we're going to need philosophers, we're going to need political scientists, we're going to need environmentalists, we're going to need economists, we're going to need artists. We're all going to actually have to come together, stop shouting at each other, and actually talk about what we value and how we're going to preserve this, which, you know, again, is our humanity.
I was going to say, we have all seen Terminator, the film Terminator, haven't we? You know, I come from the old Soviet bloc. When I was a 12-year-old, I came here. And the threat back in the 60s was nuclear war. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons we came to Australia. Now, the reality is that the nuclear weapons and so forth, and the submarines, and we don't even know what's happening, you know, it's unbelievable. And what's really quite frightening is that each one of us have a mobile telephone, we have Google account, we all have Facebook account, and we are being monitored. We are being monitored by, who are we being monitored to? Can you tell me? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the databases that are being built? The gigabytes, the terabytes of data that's being stored off on each one of you. And I think this is what the problem is. I think this is a real problem. People have to start waking up to what's happening. And I think kids, especially young kids, need to be taught what's happening, because they'll be very, very vulnerable in the future. And 1984 is coming. Think about it.
We already allow ourselves, we already, you know, bug our own houses. We all carry our tracking devices.
Absolutely.
And then,
Each one.
of course, I mean, most of us have some form of anxious attachment in regards to our mobile telephone. We kind of know where it is at all times. And, you know, of great concern was recently the big data company, is it called Palantir?
That's right.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
yeah, you know, there was a sort of manifesto that came from that was actually quite terrifying. So I think we do have to think about data and who is.
CARP.
Yeah, CARP, that's right. Yeah.
It's really scary stuff.
It is dystopian.
But what's different about the situation we're in connection to, say, Socrates' moment and concerns, is exactly Tim's contribution, which is the cybernetic capitalism. It's changing the conditions under which these discussions and affordances are being negotiated. And so I often go, you know, in Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, this will kill that, says the priest as he looks out, you know, the window, and he's talking about the printing press. So every generation has this moment of anxiety. And then, like the town that was surrounded by 4 nuclear sites, nuclear bases, you know, disaster didn't fully occur. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to be giving over cognitive capacities in this current moment because of the conditions of cybernetic capitalism in which we're existing.
I think we're already giving over quite a lot of our cognitive capacities, not even because of cybernetic capitalism, just because of human nature. And it's got to do with the convenience of the mobile phone. You know, as I said, how readily we surrender our capabilities. And some of this is useful. I mean, there's a lot about life that's sort of boring and tedious. I mean, there's a lot about work. We're very concerned about the future of work, as we should be, because it's a central side of meaning in our life. And, you know, we're very into the notion of the nobility of work. But, you know, how much nobility is there to be peeing into a water bottle in one of Jeff Bezos's Amazon factories? Like, there's work and there's work. And there's some work that I think would be great to give to the robots if we get this future of you know, universal basic income, superabundance, and it's distributed fairly and evenly, and we're allowed to actually properly enjoy our leisure. Now, the big concern at the moment with the current settings is there's not a lot to suggest that's going to happen. Elon Musk might tweet that there's this extraordinary future that's coming our way, which is not only about a universal basic income, it's about a universal super income, and there's going to be more and everything that we need for everybody. But there's nothing that actually suggests that this is the way the world is currently going.
Or even could go, considering if you then bring ecological limits into this, like the idea of just infinite curves of infinite consumption and growth and production within finite nature, including finite human nature and what we can actually be pushed to do, how much you can squeeze from your Amazon employee, so on and so forth. These things are finite and exponential curves are not. And right in that intersection is the thing that's ripping a lot of the social and ecological fabric of what composes the world. One thing that perturbs me about all of this is a notion, I think first brought up by Freud a long time ago. He talked about the disavowal. A disavowal is where you can be told something and you can know it and you can know it quite well, but then you act as if that knowledge is somehow not operative. Like you can, if you buy a packet of cigarettes and there's like a picture of a rotting foot or something horrific on it, you know that it's not going to do you any good. This is well known now, and yet to disavow that, you carry on doing it regardless. The prime example of this is in global climate change. It is absolutely known that what we are doing is making the world a less stable place, and yet we carry on anyway. And the problem with the disavow is you cannot counter that with just more information. It's like, it's not just an informational question. So then the question is like, how do we overcome that? How can we get beyond a disavow? And I say we because it's a collective thing. I'm not putting myself outside this. Like this is a problem that we have as a culture, where we can even be quite well informed about these limits, these problems, and yet we act as if it's not that knowledge is not operative. How do we get out of that bind? That is a really crucial thing. And I suspect there could be a role for arts and creativity and whatnot to play in trying to crack out of that. Not only that, but I think that we have to use what we've got. And it's an invitation to try to think differently, to try to overcome this sort of psychosocial boundary that we just keep butting our heads up and getting to a point where we just can't imagine a world without these machines that we just can't live without. And yet, like, it's a problem.
I just want to really appreciate everything that everyone has said, but particularly the vacillation between the abstract and the concrete. But one material thing that I think hasn't really been discussed, and this goes back to the management question, is that we have shown throughout our very advanced technological era that the way we manage problems is to invisibilize them to the global south. We have not been talking about the impacts that are going to visit the global south far, far, far faster than they are going to visit us. We are in a position in all developed countries of relative ease, and all of the things that are coming for us are going to come for us far, far in the future from when they're coming to people in the Maldives, coming to people whose islands are already gone. I mean, we're talking about the fast fashion waste problem. That gets invisibilized to a desert in Chile or to Africa. It just gets buried in the mud, and people subsist by digging through that waste. And those are things that, I mean, I very much am with you, Tim. I know, I get apoplectic about these things as well. We share research concerns, I think, just, you know, the dismal.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the really concerning things is how this tech is sort of landing geopolitically. And even in the way, for instance, a really substantial part of the economy of Philippines is currently based on call centres. And so there's going to be a huge hit to an economy like that, which is very much based upon labour. But those that have the contemporary capital of compute, you know, the United States, China, South Korea, etc., are much, much better positioned to cope with what's coming. And the terrible irony of it, of course, is that the vast resources required, as you said, to sustain this technology and the environmental impact of that are absolutely hitting some of these less developed nations much more acutely than those that are very much benefiting from them.
I think we've run out of time, and there's so much more that could be said. Sorry.
Oh, could I
Tim.
just do a very quick spruik? I've got 10 copies of the publication I work for, Arena, which has 4 essays on artificial intelligence in it. I've written one of them. There's a bunch of other good ones. There's excellent pieces on bird watching, on football, on Indigenous policy, on geopolitics, all kind of thing. If you'd like one, come and have a chat to me. I don't really want to take them back home.
No problems, thanks. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks to the team from Adelaide Uni for organising this, Justin and Satu and Tully as well for organising this, Ben for being here, and of course Anna and Tim for your fascinating and provocative and insightful comments. Thank you so much. Can everyone thank them? There's always a tweet. There's always a Don Dunstan deep view on all of these things, even though AI was not on his horizon. Don hated trash capitalism deeply. He hated the idea of producing things that were ephemeral and would be waste the next day. In fact, he had most of his clothes, didn't he, Stephen, tailored by an Italian tailor on Hindley Street. I was thinking of that today, but I was also thinking about William Morris, because Don was very inspired by William Morris, who believed in the dignity of work. And one of the things when this project came up, and that I've been thinking about in previous lives as well, involved in the arts, is that arts workers, artists, culture workers should have access to the dignity of work, and many of them do not. In that utopian future, I hope that there's room for artists to be paid well and given freedom to do their work.
It's no utopia without artists.
And no, it's bleak. It's bleak without arts and a rich arts and culture. So our next event will be on the 30th of July. It'll be down at the North Terrace, the other North Terrace campus, and it'll be looking at Australian culture in a volatile global order. So keep an eye on the Adelaide Uni website, keep an eye on Don Dunstan Foundation website. Best way is to sign up for our newsletter when you go there, and we'll let you know when that opens. Just a reminder too that Anna's quarterly essay is for sale out there. Please buy a copy, and she's happy to sign it for you. The bar will be open till 8, so please hang around and talk, and thank you again so much for supporting us tonight.